In this video, we're going to take a look at interval notation. And so the first thing we want to do is learn when we use an open circle and when we use a closed circle graphically, and then when we use parentheses versus when we use brackets in the interval notation. So in this first example, we have all real numbers less than a. So because it's less than and not less than or equal to, a isn't actually included in this set. So it's going to get an open circle here. And then we shade everything less than that on the number line. And then as far as the interval notation, we always use parentheses for negative infinity and infinity. And then we go to a and parentheses. And we use parentheses when you don't include the number. In the next one, we have all real numbers greater than or equal to b. So now we're including b. So we get a solid dot, and then we shaded greater than. And then if you look at the interval notation, we have a bracket here for b. And then to infinity, so it gets the parentheses again. All real numbers between a and b, we're going to have two open circles with in between shaded. We didn't include either number. All real numbers between a and b, including a and b, we shaded in between again, but now they get a solid dot. And if you notice the difference, in this first one, we had parentheses around our a and b because it wasn't included. And then we had brackets around a and b because they were included in this second one. And now we have all real numbers less than a, or greater than or equal to b. So less than a, we didn't include a, open circle, and greater than or equal to b, so we have a closed circle. And whenever we combine two sets, we're going to use union sign. So let's take a look at some questions. So we have circle the correct option, refer to the table above. In A, we have a number is included or excluded in the solution set gets a bracket. And if we use a bracket, we're going to include the value. In B, we have a number is included, excluded in the solution set gets a parenthesis. And if it gets a parenthesis, we're going to exclude it. In C, we have parentheses or brackets are always used with negative infinity, infinity. Whenever we have an infinity, we're going to use parentheses. In D, we have the smaller or negative number always comes first in the interval notation. That's going to be the smaller number. Our set may not necessarily have a negative number. So now let's take a look at some examples. In number 2, we have graph each phrase on the given number line, then express the set in interval notation. So we have all real numbers except 0 and 5. So because we want to exclude 0 and 5, we want to put open circles around them. And now we want to shade everything else on the number line to represent that it is included. And I don't think my black pen is going to show up over this black line very well, so I'm going to use a highlighter to represent it. So we're going to have everything up to 0, but not including 0. I'm going to shade all of this. Everything in between 0 and 5. And then everything after 5. So this is how we would represent on a number line all real numbers except 0 and 5. And now let's write it in interval notation. So in this interval here, from negative infinity to 0, and remember we always use parentheses for negative infinity, and then 0, and we're not including 0, union 0 to 5, and then in this last interval we have 5 to infinity, and parentheses again. In B, we have all real numbers less than or equal to negative 1. So because it says less than or equal to, we're going to put a solid dot. And it was less than or equal to, so we're going to shade everything less than negative 1. And now we have or greater than 7. And because 7's not included, I'm going to use open circle. And now we're going to shade everything greater than. And now let's write it in interval notation. So in this interval here, we have negative infinity to -1, and now we'll use a bracket because we're including that value, union 7 with parenthesis because we're not including it, to infinity. In our last example, we have all real numbers less than 3 or greater than or equal to 3. So let's start with all real numbers less than 3. So we put an open circle at 3, and now I'm going to shade everything less than 3. And the second part says or greater than or equal to 3. So now we're going to include 3, so I'm going to color our dot in, and then everything greater than 3. So now we end up with the entire number line included. So our interval is all real numbers, or from -infinity to infinity. And that's how we use interval notation.